Okay, this is Raden Kartini in Indonesia, and then Malala, who you're probably most familiar with in terms of a culture hero. Okay, and for those of you who are geographically illiterate, okay, right, Indonesia, thousands of islands. Every time I look it up, I never get the same answer in terms of how many islands there are in Indonesia, but there are literally thousands. The biggest one is Sumatra, okay, on the extreme left, and the most populous one is Java. Java accounts for 70% of the Indonesian population. So there's a problem in terms of Indonesia, in terms of Javanese domination of the Indonesian archipelago. Okay, parallels as noted, both countries, the cross-cultural context. Notice that they had a history of colonialism, long time, right? Okay, a lot of times people don't recognize the Dutch as imperial people, and they have been for a long period of time. And as noted, there were wars of resistance, and I just listed a few of them in Indonesia and in India. But it was really brutal conquest on the part of the Europeans. For a time, they were ruled by private companies, which allowed for a really brutal exploitation of the native peoples. The Dutch East India Company and the British East India Company, and then because of threats of bankruptcy, the government took them over and became basically the rulers of their respective countries. What happened in terms of exploitation, the Dutch set up what was called a culture system, and basically what it did is turn much of Indonesia into a plantation for Dutch exploitation. The Dutch needed money. Belgium was part of the Netherlands for a while. They split off, so they were, they were economically hurting, and so they needed money. And basically, what they did is get it as a result of taking over the territory, and it led to impoverishment of the people, and obviously some of the wars of resistance by the Javanese in particular. Some of the reformers, Edward Decker, was a government official, and he saw it as from the inside, and his pen name was known as Multatuli, and he wrote a book called Max Havelaar, or The Coffee Auctions of the Dutch Trading Company, about how the natives were being taken advantage of. And it took a while for his comments to sink in, but ultimately what happened is, as a result, the government endorsed what became known as an ethical policy, which kind of lasted more or less for about 40 years. Its chief spokesman was a man by the name of Conrad Theodore van Deventer, okay? And notice the Dutch imperial imagery. It says, okay, our most precious jewel, the Indonesian archipelago, kind of a jewelry. England, too, had a similar model with reference to India, the jewel in the crown, right? Okay, so again, a model of exploitation there. And here's the Queen Wilhelmina, who, when she was brought to become Queen of the Netherlands in 1898, she espoused the ethical policy and what became known as an honor debt, that we basically ripped off the natives, we owe them something back, we got to do something in exchange, okay? And the model for that was what was called association theory. The man who was the chief spokesman for it was a Christian, Snoek Hurtbronchi, who was a student of Islam. He even visited Mecca. He told the learned scholars of Islam that he was in fact a Muslim, which he was not. Okay, and he was stationed at in Mecca. I'm sorry, in the Dutch embassy there, because as a result of new technologies, the steamship and so on, more and more pilgrims could go to Mecca. And it was his job basically to make sure Indonesian pilgrims kind of towed the official government line. Because at the time, throughout much of Asia and Africa, there was what was known as the pan-Islamic resurgence. And what he was trying to do is keep Islam from becoming, quote, politicized, okay? And then foster nationalism and independence and all those other things. And so he thought, through association theory, the assumption was that by seeing the, quote, superior European civilization, the natives would identify with it, okay? And then they could be, and they would educate natives, mostly the children of elites. And they would become role models that the masses would emulate, and they would be vehicles then to work hand in hand with the Dutch to continue to exploit the native peoples. Kartini had three sisters, and in fact, some of the letters that she wrote were, in the name of three sisters, and they supported her not only in terms of teaching out of schools, but becoming educated themselves. In fact, one of the common denominators between the two women are they both had a lot of familial support for education, both from the grandfathers and their fathers. They encouraged their children, male and female, to get education. Kartini's support system, I mentioned, her family, she was an aristocrat. And so obviously she had options that poor folks just didn't have, okay? And she became fluent in Dutch, and that kind of opened up her horizons to the new world, right? She could read a lot of good stuff in European literature. And she was only educated up to the age of 12. So from about 6 to 12, she was educated, but she became very fluent in the Dutch language. And between 1892 and 1896, they went back into seclusion. Then the women were supposed to wait for a proposal of marriage, and then that would be their lives as wives and mothers. Okay, but to her family's credit, her father allowed her to subscribe to Dutch magazines and to correspond with a whole variety of individuals that I refer to as, quote, subversives: socialists, reformers, liberals, pacifists. For example, she read Multatuli, right? She's kind of read this guy who was very critical of Dutch policy. She read Cecile de Jong, Van Beek and Dunk. Try that 10 times fast. Okay, very famous woman, female reformer in the Netherlands, who wrote a best-selling book called Hilda van Seilenberg, which was about a woman who refused to get married. She didn't want to be an appendage to a male at that point in time. And the Dutch feminist movement was very alive and very vocal and progressive at that point in time. She read Bertha von Suttner, who probably you never heard of, and until I started checking this out, I never heard of her either, but she was a pacifist, a social critic, and she wrote a book, Lay Down Your Arms, and it was I said won the Nobel Peace Prize. Now I'm not 100% sure, but she was at least a candidate for the Nobel Peace Prize. This was called The Uncle Tom's Cabin of the Peace Movement, okay? It went through 37 editions in 12 languages. It was very popular, and Kartini read that. Cooperus, a novelist and poet there, wrote a book called The Hidden Force. He visited Indonesia, and he said basically because the Javanese have this mysticism, this spirit, this undefinable quality that they will never ever be conquered. Okay, so it's kind of the old cliche: East is East and West is West. Okay, he's saying that in this book that became a popular novel in the Dutch literature. And she read Pandita Ramabai. Pandita Ramabai was an Indian reformer who and a contemporary. At that time, the name Pandita, or the title Pandita, means learned scholar. Her father, they were Brahmins, and basically wanderers. They would just wander around the territory and teach, and that's how they got a living. Her parents died in one of the many famines that hit India in the 19th century. And she later on became a convert to Anglican Christianity, and that kind of impeded her social impact in India because she was seen as kind of a traitor to the Muslim majority. But she was a reformer, got rid of bride burning and widow, child marriages, and started education and so on. But look at what Kartini says in her letters. I shook with excitement, so it's not only wild women who are able to take care of themselves, a brown Indian woman can make herself free and independent too, right? So she's overcoming those racial as well as sexual barriers. Corresponded with Stella Zeehandelaar, again a woman, socialist, Dutch reformer and feminist, to whom she wrote most of her letters that later on became published. She was, Kartini was an intellectual. She wrote about traditional crafts, the wood carvers in the batik, makers of Indonesian batik fabric. Okay, wrote an anthropology treatise on the reported language, the country, and the people of the East Indies. Right, she is often referred to as the first Indonesian intellectual as a result of her contributions. Okay, One of her key influences was a man by the name of Jacques Henri Raden, who was the Minister of Religion and Instruction and Labor in the Indonesian imperial government, who was there for a while. After 1905, he resigned and became critical. He was a socialist and a reformer, and he wanted to use Kartini as a model for what could happen if education is used appropriately in the Indonesian context. Okay, and notice I have support and subversion, because he wanted to use Kartini as a model of a woman who admired Dutch culture. Okay, it's one of those people who could be kind of a support for Dutch colonialism. And he collected Kartini's letter. And one of the passages in Kartini says, "We have emerged from darkness into light, a result of European education." So we use that as the title of the book on her letters in 1911. And he basically heavily edited the stuff, basically cutting out anything that was critical of Dutch colonial policy or critical of Dutch rule at all. And some letters he totally omitted, some he edited. And the question is, who is or how much do we know about the real Kartini? Because she really had a lot more to offer than seeming support for the Dutch colonial rule. And later on, what seemed to be some said, a betrayal of her calling, she married. Throughout her writing, she said, "I'm never going to get into a forced marriage. I will never marry. I will not be, an appendage to another man." But because of she had a foot in both camps. She was a kind of a slave to tradition to some degree, and trying to strike out in yet another area and be, quote, what she called a modern woman. And yet her father, as a regent, kind of an administrative official under the Dutch government, he was putting a lot of pressure onto her in order to get married and be a, quote, good little girl. Even though she wanted to get an education, one of her correspondents tried to get her to get a scholarship to the Netherlands, and abandoned and basically subverted it. He said, don't go. He said, you can go to the capital in Indonesia maybe and get an education there, but that never happened either. Because she was a publisher, and women were really not supposed to do that thing, particularly the ruling classes. She was becoming an embarrassment to her father because she was becoming prominent, and while she resisted for a long time, about 6 years of being pressured into marriage, her sister got married, her father was ill, so she ultimately married a man who her pen friend, Estella Zehandalar, said is a betrayal of her calling, because she married an older man. He was in his 50s. That's really old, right? Really old. Okay? He had a polygamous marriage. He had 3 wives. He had 6 children. She said, I would never do that. Okay? And yet, was it a forced marriage? Not really. She had, he made the man, Joe Diningrat, made a proposal, okay, and the father said, okay, here's a good deal for you, and she said, well, okay, here are my conditions, right? Okay, you will allow me to establish a school. I will be, for girls, I will educate them, okay, and in her later letters, she said, well, I fell in love, but a lot of people who know more about Kartini than I do say she's saying that. She didn't really fall in love, but she was catering or submitting to the pressure of her father to be a good Indonesian girl. But see, these are some of the schools. Kartini died in 1904 in childbirth. She really wanted to give birth to a girl, but she had a boy. Okay, and she was disappointed at that, because she really had these dreams about educating girls for the future and being contributors to Indonesian society. Her letters that were published by Abandoned in 1911 became a foundation, and they started establishing schools for girls in Indonesia, beginning in 1913. So part of her heritage is, yes, she did begin to establish schools for girls in Indonesia, and they were really quite well done. Okay, see a class being conducted. Okay, and some of them are European children, or what are called Indos, mixed, Europeans and Indonesian, right? Her education and impact, she wrote a tract. She was asked, actually, by a Dutch administrator, Johan Slingenberg, to comment about the aims of education. Never asked a woman before. She's like 20 years old. Never asked a woman for input on policy before. Absolutely amazing for her to be asked that, okay? No woman's opinion previously sought, okay? And she said basically the ethical policy would fail unless Indonesia were made capable of coping with and participating in the new world of Western technology, right? So prepare them for change, the new world of the future, okay? But notice, okay, this important thing where she's talking about women in education and equality was not included in the letters of 1911, was not included in the English version of the letters in the 1920s, right? It was not in line with what the Dutch wanted the people to see or hear, okay? And it was only printed in English in 1964, which stressed the role of women's resolution of social problems, but that's because the Indonesian government had a new leader and they wanted women to be included for their own reasons, and as noted, okay, there's the idea of the schools, but this is the curriculum of a Kartini school, okay, and notice, okay, language instruction, Japanese literature, geography, history, and so on, but notice, okay, from the fifth one down, home ec, simple bookkeeping, needlework, hygiene, first aid, education, and singing songs, okay, that is what today we would call the pink collar ghetto, right? Okay, in terms of education. So she was getting education, yes, but with a certain kind of limitations imposed on it by those on the outside. One of her contemporaries also went established schools, Dewey Sartika, but notice the title of them, Wife Eminency Schools, right? Kind of, you know, the traditional role, wife and mother, and all that stuff, okay? Her sisters were involved in nursing and education, okay? And the other one, Sumantri, also kind of made a report on government welfare in 1914, so they're making changes in terms of Indonesia, okay? These events, boom, you've all been there, right? I'm not gonna go through it. These events basically put an end to Kartini schools by 1940, okay? And the irony is that Kartini would never have been heard of had her letters not been published by her Dutch benefactor, Abandona, all right? And then this is the followers after Kartini. You know, Sukarno was in power, he had his own idea in terms of ruling and so on. And this is probably arguably the most famous Dutch novelist, Pramodia Anantatur, tried to co-opt Kartini and say she was a hero of the proletarian revolution because she was not royalty herself, she had common roots. And they had their own agenda. Indonesia was veering to the left, you know, the communist Chinese influence is very strong there, and so they were trying to make her a folk hero of populist causes. And there's Sukarno with his several children, 85 wives, and so on. He was deposed after a bloody insurrection in 1965, and Suharto also took control. And again, co-opting Kartini's model, okay? Notice they named her Mother of the Nation. She becomes a national hero in 1964, but Mother of the Nation. One of the reports, I find it here, in 1968, okay, under Suharto, okay, the Indonesian government said, our Indonesian women, the Indonesian woman of today is the equal of the Indonesian man in every respect, in every field. 1968, notice it's during his order, okay? And here's what the Indonesian Minister of Education said 3 years later. Every woman should be a participant in the development for the glory of the nation, here's the kicker, in those fields appropriate to their nature and biology. If you study women's history in America, it sounds like the 1872 resolution about, you know, God and nature have foreordained women for doing these things. What? Which one?
The last part.
1971?
Yeah.
1971, the Indonesian Minister for Education and Culture said, quote, every woman should participate in the development for the glory of the nation in those fields appropriate to their nature and biology. Okay, so how much progress has there been since Kartini tried to get her reformed? Okay, this is kind of a quick overview of what the government policies were, and then the progress in Indonesia. These are the handouts, if you want to see in more detail. Has there been progress in Indonesia? Al Jazeera, right? The Arabic newspaper, okay? Notice the title, it tells it all. Why Indonesia's education system is among the worst in the world. Okay, all right? Ranked last of 50 nations measuring literacy. And notice the threshold of literacy in both Pakistan and in Indonesia is like, if you can read a letter, okay, read a sentence in any language, okay, and comprehend it, okay? Pretty low threshold, right, for literacy, okay? So, okay, 1/3 of the students complete basic education for teaching. We can identify with that, right? Okay, rigid obedience, rote learning, okay, unqualified teachers, absenteeism. Teacher salaries are so low that they basically walk off the job and become taxi drivers when they're supposed to be in school teaching. I mean, how do you teach, okay? They work outside for additional income, okay? 40% of the budget is siphoned off. Sounds like New York City Board of Education. Okay, government proposes to abolish or postpone the teaching of science, geography, and English. Okay, science, geography, and English. Okay, in the elementary school, instead promote national identity and patriotism, right? So are these really the tools that that students, and particularly women, need to be functioning in terms of national growth and progress? 15-year-olds score second from the bottom in math, science, and reading. Thank God it's not in America, right? Wow. Okay, cheating scandals, selling exams. What are we in Atlanta?
Yes.
You know, good grief. Okay, tertiary education, right? College. 400 university rankings, notice they are 360, 369, and 395, right? I mean, they're at the bottom, okay? Low enrollment rates, okay, of all Indonesian students at the bottom in terms of even Southeast Asian standards. Notice the Constitution demands 20% of the state budget on education, but only but does not. 17% of it goes to education, but only 3% of the gross domestic product. Not a lot, okay? And okay, now teacher evaluation based on student performance. Where have we heard that? Okay, of 400 teacher training institutions, 40 considered good by the Secretary of Education. 1 in 10. The rest of them suck. Okay? Definition of literacy is noted. Any person over 15 can with understanding, read and write a short, simple statement of their everyday life. Okay, and how do you integrate a system with 18,000 islands and 700 languages? Awesome, okay, all right? They're trying to establish community colleges, but again, okay, look at the barriers to women. Gender-based textbooks. How many of you old enough to remember Dick and Jane? Mm-hmm. Right, okay, still a problem, okay? Gender stereotyping, okay? Inadequate programs to promote gender equality, inadequate gender awareness, the pressures of tradition, early marriage, right? Okay, all those obstacles that Kartini hated were still there. And a woman, probably you never heard of, but again, a Dutch woman who had visited Indonesia. She was a feminist, the first Dutch female doctor, and the first pioneer in birth control, even before it began in the United States. She was the head of the International Women's Suffrage Alliance, and she toured a variety of foreign countries with Carrie Chapman Cott, the National American Women's Suffrage Association leader who ultimately got it passed in New York State in 1917, urged reform for women in Indonesia, especially education. Now remember the Kartini syllabus, right? Okay, what it was all about. She said, it is too narrow, it is a vocational curriculum. We should make education for women to make them independent as individuals and prepare them for meaningful roles in society. The past as prologue, right? She's saying that, okay, when she was writing, this is in 1912, okay, and the issue is still there. Okay, back to the second half, okay. Pakistan, okay, part of India, okay, through the 1940s, and then it became independent under the leadership of Muhammad Ali Jinnah in 1947. The partition, bloody riots, massacre, 500,000 people or more were killed in a forced migration based on religion through the separation of the countries. You can see more of that, okay, right? And some of the problems that you said Pakistan, okay, when Zia al-Haq took over in a military coup, okay, he imposed Sharia law in Islam in Pakistan and discriminated against the Ahmadi. you're familiar with ISIL and what's going on and how they believe they have the only true vision of Islam. Ahmadi was a sect, an Islamic sect begun in 1889, and by the Constitution in Pakistan, they are described as being not Muslims. Okay, so there is discrimination against them today. Okay, and here's Malala. Okay, notice the kind of the pageantry in the background too. She's named after a hero of the Afghan wars. Her people are Pashtuns, kind of the dominant group in Afghanistan. They migrated into the Swat Valley later. And Malala of Maiwand was a leader of a woman who became a leader in one of the Afghan wars against them. Are you familiar with the story of Molly Pitcher? Her husband was killed, and so then she grabbed the cannon and led. That's what Malala of Maiwand did. Okay, her parents. Notice again the roots here. You got to have strong parental support. The marriage was not arranged. They married quote for love. Okay, her father. Okay, was outspoken. He's outspoken against C.L. Hook and his dictatorship, against the Taliban, literally risking his life. Okay, Malala's grandfather, okay, through the father's side, was an educated Islamic scholar, and yet he insisted that his son get a Western education. Okay, right? So he was sent to a modern school. Okay, began his own school. All right. And under another military dictatorship, Musharraf in Pakistan, okay, honor killing continued. You know the story about the honor killings, okay? Madrasas were built with Saudi, the Saudi help, okay? Religious instruction, they had a lot of other issues that they had to deal with, okay? But Malala Fazlullah, here's the guy, you can see him with the beard, reactionary. Okay, he murdered teachers, bombed schools, okay, and forbade women to get an education. And Malala and her father, okay, went against him. And they were courageous enough to challenge what this guy's all about. And to give you an idea of where this guy is coming from, when there was an earthquake in 2005, okay, Malala Fazlullah said it was because they dance. Okay, dancing caused it, and so you gotta obey the Quran. Okay, okay, and where do we get? Okay, Malala, the BBC asked for a diary of what life was like under the Taliban. She used a pseudonym called Gul Makai. Gul Makai was, again, a hero in Pakistani history. Then they made a documentary of her. She won the Pakistan National Peace Prize, was given a death threat, and then you know the story. She's on the bus, the Taliban commander, they shoot her, okay, and there's a picture of her in the hospital, okay, and she won 42 international awards, okay, as a biography and a biopic that also came out, I think it was in March of 2016 it was out, okay, but notice that she has her enemies. Okay, all Pakistan Private Schools Federation banned her book as disrespecting Islam. She's condemned by the West. She was called a tool of the CIA. Okay, but notice in terms of the problems, rural, urban, right? Okay, Pakistan is 70% rural, so that's where the bulk the population are. Okay, old in terms of literacy, 38%, 45%, 46%. Notice that the literacy increases the younger you get. Okay, but for tribal areas, again, rural areas, okay, the literacy for girls is only 9.5%. That's pretty grim. Okay, primary enrollment. Notice the sex discrimination there. Okay, secondary enrollment. Notice the statistics. Sex discrimination. Shortage of teachers, poorly equipped schools, outdated curriculum. Okay, Pakistani teachers don't, teach evolution. Okay, college for graduates, again, notice the statistical discrepancy there. And again, notice the definition of literacy, very, very critical, right? Who can read, write, clear print in any language, or can read a newspaper, okay, so on, okay. All right, and here's Malala, okay, kind of being a force for global change in women's education, okay? But again, from my handouts, the Islamic state of education in Pakistan, pretty grim, right? Rural versus urban, okay, male versus female, okay, the types of curriculums they have to deal with, okay, forced marriage, and girls have to work to support their families. And how bad am I doing? All right, now, because this is what we're talking about, transformational leadership. Oh, yeah, 20 minutes and now he gets to it. Okay. In some of the stuff that you already heard, there are criteria in terms of what it is. Okay, right, as a visionary, creative, and active leader. Okay, she said, and this quote, I wanted to change because I had it somewhere else. Well, she said, women as supporters of civilization, no. It is not because women are considered better in this case, but because I am convinced that it is from women big changes can start. From women, a child first acquires education. On a mother's lap, a child learns to feel, think, speak, and how could mothers possibly educate their children if they are not uneducated? If they are not educated, sorry. Okay, right? Committed to new thinking. Okay, I would do the humblest work, thankfully, if I could be independent. Why did God give us talents and not the opportunity to use them? Okay? All right, and Malala in the same category. I often imagine the scene clearly. Even if they come to kill me, I will not tell them that what they are trying to do is wrong, that education is our basic right. Okay? And notice she defends the Ahmadi, who by the Pakistani constitution are not Muslims. She says, in fact, they are, taking very, outspoken positions there. Okay? Intellectual stimulation. Remember I said she was the first Indonesian intellectual? She read a lot, okay? She defended Arabs in Indonesia, okay? Defended traditional cultures, okay, and carvings and so on. And the letters, well, she did not publish them. The letters were published by others and made her, after her death, a prominent figure. Malala, blogs, bio, diary, okay, now the biopic, okay? And, okay, create a vision of what they aspire to be and communicate it to others. If the child I carry into my heart is a girl, which is what she wanted, okay, I shall wish that she lived to have a rich, full life, that she complete the work of her mother has begun. She shall never be compelled to do anything abhorrent to her deepest feelings. What she does must be of her own free will. She shall have a mother that watches over her inmost being and a father who will never force her into anything. Remember? Okay, it will make no difference to him and his daughter, if his daughter remains unmarried her whole life long. What will count will be that she shall always keep her esteem and affection for us. Malala, okay, Malala Fund website. Post a photo of you and your favorite book and tell the world leaders to fund the real weapon for change, education. And then together, that should be world leaders, my mistake. World leaders, okay, if instead of going to war, they, got books and education, it'd be a much better world, okay? Notice, takes on the president of the free world, right? No more drone strikes, tough. And she's 15, okay, right? Okay. In July 2015, she opened a school for girls in Lebanon. Okay, today is my first day as an adult. On behalf of the world's children, I demand the world leaders we invest in books instead of bullets. Interestingly, whoops. Okay, transform followers' needs. Kartini, I want to live 100 years. Life is too short. There's much to be done. Okay, I am not yet able to start. Okay, Malala, traditions are not sent from heaven. They are not sent from God. It is we who make cultures, and we have the right to change, and we should change it. Who else said that? Okay, great. Okay, as a feminist, okay, she wrote Educate the Javanese, okay, and she says, raise the Javanese woman in mind and spirit, and you will have a rigorous fellow workers for the great wonderful task, the civilization of a people against which number of millions. Give Java energetic, intelligent mothers, and the raising up of a people will be a matter of time only. You can see why they made her IBU, right? National, mother, okay? Okay, I would have children, but above all, I would never follow the unhappy custom of putting boys before girls. I should teach my children, boys and girls, to regard one another as equal human beings and give them the same education. Okay, again, a force for equality. Okay, Malala. They proclaim Malala Day. It's not my day. It's the day of every woman, every boy and girl who have raised their voices for their rights. Okay, belief in the victory of their cause. She died soon after. The freedom of women is inevitable, right? Okay, it is coming, but we cannot hasten it. The course of destiny cannot be turned aside, but in the end, triumph has been foreordained. We shall not be living to see it, but what will that matter? We have helped break the path that leads to it, and this is a glorious privilege, right? Kind of we're pioneers in doing great things, okay? And Malala, okay? The terrorists thought they would change my aims. Well, they're not gonna stop me, no matter what. And she said, I'm even for education for the children of the Taliban, which obviously the Taliban. Okay. I speak for the right of the education of every child, okay? All right, and here, anybody see the Academy Awards? Okay, is this woman familiar to you? Charmaine Obaid-Chinoy? Okay, she won the Academy Award for documentary called the Price of Forgiveness, A Girl in the River, about honor killings and so, all that. Okay, and the point is, she was educated in a Jesuit school in Pakistan. So I presume by that she was a Christian, although I can't find whether she is or not. You notice the bombings in Lahore aimed at the Christians recently? Okay, all right. And then she went to Smith College, okay, went back to Pakistan, became an activist and a filmmaker. See what education does, opens all kinds of doors and so on. Okay, but notice, okay, we have, the West doesn't have clean hands here, right? We have a history of exploitation and discretion, gender insensitivity, neglect of women's rights is a global issue, but there are signs of progress, such as Kartini and Malala. It took 80 years for women to get the vote in the United States. You might not remember that, but it was a long time, and the struggle is not yet over, okay? One symbol of progress in terms of third world countries is Pakistan, Charmaine Obaid-Chinoy's Girl in the River, and once she got it, the president of Pakistan said, we will eliminate, okay, honor killings in Pakistan. Okay. Any questions? Oh, later. Okay. Here's the president and Malala. Okay, all right.
Okay, very good. Thank you. We'll open it up for about 5 minutes of discussion. We have one more presentation. We were supposed to take a break. You can kind of let me know if that needs to happen. And we have one more presentation for lunch, and we'll be fine. Because lunch is at 12:30, so you'll have lots of time for your presentation.
No problem.
Can we open it up for discussion for a few minutes? If you have questions for Ann or for Dan, let's open it up now and ask those questions or any comments that you may have. And then we'll take, instead of a 10-minute break, a 5-minute break, and then come back for our last presentation before lunch. Okay. Questions, comments?
Yeah,
Yes.
I have a question, perhaps.